event. We'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. This summit is virtual, but rooted on Duwamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish land. We acknowledge the land we sit on and occupy today is the traditional home of the Duwamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish tribal nations. Without them, we would all not have access to this environment. We take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. We'd also like to take note that we are recording the session and it will be available following the summit. So this summit is hosted by Cascade Bicycle Club and Washington Bikes, two sister statewide organizations with a shared vision of bicycling for all. Cascade serves bike riders of all ages and abilities throughout Washington state, educating new riders, advocating for safe places to ride, and holding events and rides. Washington Bikes advocates for bicyclists' rights, endorses political candidates, holds officials accountable, and works to shape policies that will make bicycling safe and accessible for all. And now just a quick thank you again to our sponsors. We want to take a second to thank our sponsors whose collective contributions have enabled us to bring together 15 panels with experts, with registration free for all attendees. Thanks to Amazon, our presenting sponsor. You've joined the panel Organizing Bicyclists for Climate Action. And this session will include 3 speakers. Eric Fine is first up. Eric is a project manager with the Yale program on climate change communication. Eric will discuss public perceptions and beliefs related to global warming. This is information that can help us all become better climate communicators and educators. And just a note, I first met Eric when I interviewed him for a story for REI about how people in the outdoor recreation community, which includes bicyclists, can become more effective climate communicators. Yale's research shows that a majority of Americans believe in global warming and are worried about it. But we often mistakenly believe otherwise, which can contribute to a spiral of silence. Elaine Salinger is up next. Elaine is a volunteer with the Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby is a national grassroots nonprofit with local chapters around the country, including here in Washington state. CCL, as it's known, trains citizens how to become advocates for action on climate change. Elaine will discuss carbon pricing and the Citizen Climate Lobby's efforts to pass so-called carbon fee and dividend legislation. This is a bipartisan solution, that would require polluting industries to pay a fee with revenues returned directly to American citizens. Up next is Paulo Nunez-Ueno of Front and Center. He will discuss efforts here in Washington to address the issue of climate justice. Climate change is disproportionately harming disadvantaged communities and communities of color. In a way, we could say climate change is systemic racism on a global scale, and addressing climate change through the lens of equity and racial justice provides an even greater moral imperative to move forward with solutions. Paulo will preview some legislative strategies and initiatives to push for increased multimodal transportation funding right here in Olympia that benefit historically underserved communities. The presentation format, we are in the introductory phase right now. Each speaker will chat for 10 minutes, presenting slides and talking. After that, we will have a Q&A period. It says 10 minutes here, but I think we're going to have a little more time. I wanted to leave a little time for people who are joining in to be able to ask questions of these folks who are giving us their knowledge this morning. We encourage attendees to ask questions via the chat bar. Chat monitors will direct these questions to the moderators. And moderator, me, and ask the panelists. And we also ask you to please fill out the Google feedback form that will be posted at the end of this session. And before I introduce Eric, we're here because climate change is a direct threat to bicycling, as well as so much of what we value. This is a photo I took, or rather, of my colleague, Chris Heminger, during last summer's wildfires, which filled the air with toxic smoke. And we know that this toxic smoke, dangerous heat waves, extreme weather, these are all a direct existential threat to all active transportation, including bicycling, walking, and rolling. Climate change threatens to erase so much of the good work that we are all here today concerned about and trying to advance in the bike, walk, and roll space. Tens of millions of Americans ride bikes. We have a voice. The bike industry is large and economically powerful, and we need to figure out how to use this power to advance progress. This panel was born from the recognition that we must also shift the narrative around bicycling. Everyone who rides a bike for transportation is a climate hero. The same goes for individuals who walk, roll, or use mass transit. But these individual actions, while extremely important and valuable, won't solve the climate crisis. We need to look beyond our own carbon footprints and push for systemic change at scale. Hopefully, this panel will be a step toward that goal. Cascade recently signed the Bike Industry Climate Pledge. And if you work for, do business with bike shops, or do advocacy in the bike space, we encourage you to have your leadership sign the Bike Industry Climate Pledge as well. You can find a link to the Climate Pledge and more information and links related to this panel in our blog post, Pedaling for Progress on Climate Change. And I'll ask that my chat moderator share that link. With that, I am going to turn over the presentation to Eric Fine of the Yale Program for Climate Change Communication. Eric, are you able to?
Good morning. Thanks for the intro, Paul. Let me just get my slides working here. You can see them okay? Very good. So I'm here calling in from the other side of the country right now, where I am in New Haven, Connecticut. But not too long ago, I used to live in Washington State in Olympia, and I did undergrad there, actually about 20 years ago now, in Olympia, Washington. So bringing together Washington with climate change, with biking, I guess I had to be in this panel here. So I fell in love with the mountains in Washington State, and I was working for summers during undergrad up out of Mazama, Washington, taking folks on mountaineering trips with Outward Bound. And during the school year, I was down in Olympia, Washington at Evergreen State College. And it was interesting. I was going from spot to spot on different glaciers. This is Baker right here. But I never went back to the same glacier too many times, not even twice, until 2005 when I started working in South America in Patagonia. And just seeing in 2-3 years the changes before my eyes made me say, I think my next job needs to be on climate change. So I came back to grad school, did a master's of environmental science with a focus on public perception and climate communications. I had been debating between which of the many climate solutions I wanted to get involved with, and realized that they're all needed. The local agriculture is needed, the energy efficiency is needed, the public transit and biking are needed solutions as well. So I thought, well, how can I help society get behind all of those more, which is needed. And that's how I came into the Yale program on climate change communication. Also a biker, so love to help activate and support this community in its work on climate change. It's interesting. Here is a study where they looked at different individual actions that someone can take to decrease carbon emissions. And they found, you can see over here, live car free is one of the high impact actions you could take. So thank you for doing what you're doing. But as you know, it is nowhere near enough. All of the individual actions that people can take right now are very small to what we actually need. Because systems are set up in a way where we are not incentivized sufficiently to do the low carbon actions and lifestyles that we need to. We need to change the system so that everyone will do all of these individual level actions, whether that be biking or change in diet, or all of the other things they need to do way more to align with science and decrease our emissions to zero by 2050. In order to think about this, to do this, to talk to people and society and groups and bikers about climate change, the more you know about your audience, the better. And so we try and study audiences to help all different communicators be able to figure out their communication strategy more effectively. Because it turns out when we try and guess what other people are thinking about climate change, we're pretty far off. So I'd just like you, maybe you've seen some of the numbers already, but if you haven't, think, what percentage of people in the United States think that climate change is happening or understand that climate change is happening? Pick a number. Okay. On average, we guess that 54% of people say that climate change is happening. This was when we asked people to guess a few years ago, so maybe it's changed since then. But this is nowhere, so, and people guess all different, depending on if you're a liberal Democrat, you'll guess 63%. If you're female, 53%, and then all the way down to conservative Republicans, they guess the smallest number, and 73 is actually how many were saying that climate change is happening a few years ago. We just got numbers back on Friday, and something's going on right now because we've just had this monster increase, and now 76% of people in the United States understand that climate change is happening. That's versus 12% that think that climate change is not happening. So giant difference right here. But when you're thinking about an audience, it's not enough to say, do people understand that it's happening or not? There's a lot more nuance to it. And we'll get into that nuance in a sec. But it's interesting, despite 76% of people saying that it's happening, hardly anyone is talking about it. So we have 67% of folks say that they rarely or never talk about it. And only about a third of us occasionally are talking about it. So here's getting into more of the nuance. You can't just say some people believe or they don't. So we've split it up into 6 groups. And we see the alarmed over here. This number is going to change as we update our data over the next few days because of all the data that we just got in from our national fall survey. So that alarmed number is going up. But the alarmed folks are the ones that are saying climate change is happening, it's human caused, and it's here and it's now. And we got to do something about it. So I imagine most of the people on this call. Then we got concerned right here. And they're the ones that say it's happening, it's human caused, it's bad, but it's not really here and now. It's more something my kids are going to have to deal with, or grandkids, or people in poorer countries or poorer areas of this country. Cautious, they're the fence sitters, and they say maybe it's happening, maybe it's not, let's be careful just in case. Disengaged haven't really thought too much about it. The doubtful say, I don't think it's happening. If it is, I don't think it's human caused. And the dismissive, these 8%, are the only people in here that are firmly convinced that it's not happening, it's not human caused, and anything purported to be a climate change solution, they're often against that. What's interesting is that in any part of society, in any state, for example, there's going to be a breakdown of the 6 Americas. In Bicyclists, there's a breakdown of the 6 Americas. It looks different where geographically or when whatever kind of group you're looking at, but there's always going to be some of each of these, and often a lot of groups come to us and say, how can we convince people that think it's not happening that it is happening? And we say, do you know that there's only 8% of those? And they say, oh, okay. We say, what about over here? Because even amongst the alarmed, there are a whole bunch of them that say, I'm not quite sure what I can do about it, or what's the most effective thing to do about it. So not all of these folks, or a good percentage of them, aren't yet involved in solutions or climate change campaigns, or they think that it's too expensive to implement the solutions that we need. They don't understand that there's already people all over around them implementing solutions with all kinds of co-benefits, often saving money by doing so. But if you are interested in reaching out to cautious, disengaged, doubtful, anyone in the middle, if you can find the alarmed people that are similar to those other folks, then they're going to be the best messengers. So we now see these are the brand new numbers as well as of Friday, that 70% of people over here are very worried or somewhat worried, with 35% somewhat worried. And you have to be careful with the worry. Might it just make people say there's no hope, we can't do anything about this? And luckily, we found that that is not the case, because that number has been growing of people who are very worried, but only 12% of them over here say it's too late to do anything. And that's been staying steady. So there is still a bunch of hope in these 2 green bars of people saying it's not too late, we can do something about that. Those are your people that you need to reach out to. And then we ask another question: would you join a campaign to convince an elected official to take action on climate change? And we find that a little bit around 1% say I'm already doing that. But we got 10% here that say I definitely would. And then another 24% that say I probably would. Then we ask them, well, why aren't you yet? The number one answer: no one has asked me to. It's that simple. A lot of folks are out there not knowing what the solutions are, saying they would participate if someone asked them to, just waiting for you to go and ask them to be part of a solution. So I don't have numbers on bicyclists in Washington and Oregon, but I do have Washington numbers in general. And we can see that in Washington, there are, let's see, 65% of people say that they're worried about climate change. King County is actually a record county in the US, with 72% saying that they're worried about global warming. But all over the state, all these orange numbers are more than 50. So you've got plenty of folks that are alarmed and just waiting to be asked, waiting to be organized. One last resource I want to leave you with is we take the data from those maps I just show you and try and get them into an easy to deliver handout. These are the Yale Climate Opinion fact sheets, because not only do everyday people on the street misunderstand what people are thinking in society on climate change, but all kinds of decision makers do as well. Members of Congress don't understand that there is as much support for climate solutions as there is, or as much worry. So if you're sitting down with members of Congress, if you're sitting down with local elected officials, helping them understand what the people, what their constituents around them are thinking on climate change can be powerful in when you're asking them to make systemic changes, which is what we need to address climate change. I look forward to your questions in a minute when we're all done talking.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Kirk did ask a question in chat, and I would ask Kirk to be patient, and we will get to that question for Eric at the conclusion of the speakers. Eric's slide about no one has asked them is extremely pertinent, and it segues very nicely into Elaine Salinger's presentation. Elaine from Citizen Climate Lobby, I will turn it over to you now.
Great. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this is me, and I am a member of Citizens Climate Lobby. We are a grassroots group that's been around since 2007. We're citizens just like you and me who want our politicians to pass laws to help stop climate change. So I'm going to dive right in. I want to share a website called En-ROADS with you. It's a climate change simulator that looks at 18 of the big solutions to climate change and calculates the effects on average global temperature every 20 years through 2100. So what you can see is there are two graphs at the top. This one is our energy use. This one is the average global temperature every 20 years through 2100. And I hope all of you know that the average global temperature has already gone up 1.1 degrees compared to pre-industrial times. So if we keep on going at the present trajectory, we're due for an increase of 3.6 degrees centigrade, which we have been told is not a livable world. So I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate a few of these individual solutions, and then I'm going to do it collectively. So a lot of people think that we need to plant 1 trillion trees, and what you can see is that that will drop the average global temperature 1/10 of 1 degree. So not the home run. A lot of people, it's controversial. A lot of people have it set in their mind that they want nuclear. Again, not the big game changer. Everywhere I travel, everyone says they're going to buy an electric car, thinking that's going to stop climate change. You can see it will improve the situation 1/10 of 1 degree. And, you know, everyone's into REACH codes. I am too. Electricity in all new buildings and industry. It will drop the average global temperature 0.3 degrees. So now I'm going to show you what putting a price on carbon will do. And this is quite spectacular. This shows us that putting a price on carbon has the potential to drop the average global temperature 1 full degree centigrade. And there is no other solution that has this potential. So now let's say we completely get rid of coal. Let's say we almost get rid of oil and we almost get rid of natural gas. We go ahead and use all the bioenergy we can, all the renewables. I'll stay away from nuclear because it's so controversial. We use new zero carbon. We make sure that all of our transportation is energy efficient, that all of our new cars, buses, and trucks are only electric. that our buildings and industry are energy efficient, and that all the new buildings only have electricity. I'm going to stay away from growth because it's pretty controversial. Let's say we can't completely stop cutting down all the trees, but we do a much better job. And let's say that we stop industry and farmers from emitting so much methane. I don't think we can completely do it, but we do a pretty darn good job. And let's say we go ahead and plant those trillion trees. Everybody loves trees. And we plant trees on every available part of the earth that can support trees. And now what you can see is that the average global temperature would increase 1.6 degrees compared to pre-industrial times. So this means a half a degree warmer than it is right now. And we're told that this is a livable world. Now, let's say that maybe in about 10 years, some super smart group of people, maybe some of the people in this meeting, figure out how to sequester carbon and are able to scale it up. And now what you can see is that the average global temperature would increase 1.3 degrees, so 0.2 above where it is right now. So because I didn't go over each of the solutions individually, this is a summary of the 18 climate change solutions in En-ROADS and their effects. And so what I want you to see from this slide and from the presentation I did with En-ROADS is that clearly putting a price on carbon is the most effective solution to climate change. And I'm going to go into a bit about why that is. The second thing that I really need you to see is that we need all possible solutions. And the third thing is that there is reason to hope. So what does it mean to put a price on carbon? It means charging a fee on all carbon-based energy as it's brought out of the ground or imported into the country. And this fee would be paid by the oil and gas companies. And the US government already keeps track of how much carbon-based energy is brought out of the ground and imported. So why is it the most effective? So the big answer is that when something costs more, people and business look for a cheaper product. Money changes people's behavior faster than anything else. The second reason is that nothing needs to be invented and no infrastructure needs to be built. All of the other solutions require infrastructure, planning, and a lot of time. A third reason is that when the price structure is changed in a predictable way, it will jumpstart research into new products. And my favorite example of this is the internet. I mean, 20 years ago, who would have imagined the internet and how it has transformed all of our lives? The fourth reason is that all of these solutions require separate legislation, and each piece of legislation requires a lot of time. Putting a price on carbon is one piece of legislation that jumpstarts all of the other solutions. So for example, plastic is made partially out of oil and gas. You make oil and gas more expensive. Imagine most of our plastic going away and with it, the plastic pollution. So how do you put a price on carbon? You do this by building political will to pass a law in the House and the Senate in Washington or in Washington State. So there is a bill in the House, a bipartisan bill, right now called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, HR 2307. This bill not only puts a price on carbon, but also 100% of the fee that's collected is distributed equally to all people living in the United States, because the government doesn't keep the money, it doesn't grow government, which should appeal to conservative voters. It is the socially just form of pricing carbon because lower and most middle income people would receive more money back than what they would pay out for increased costs. And this would be in the form of a monthly check. So high income people would pay the lion's share because they consume more, they fly more, but they can afford it. They would get the same amount back in that monthly check that you and I would. It is a market solution. The fee increases every year in a predictable, transparent way, and business can prepare and innovate. And no one is telling you where or how to get your energy, and the monthly check goes directly to you. And there's also a border adjustment. And this is the part that brings the rest of the world along with us. When goods are imported from a country that doesn't have this fee, a fee or tariff is charged, and that money is also returned to you. So it feels like a tariff to the country that's importing goods into the United States. And this provides an incentive for other countries to do the same thing. So how do we build political will? And I'm going to tell you the most important thing that you can do for the climate. We have got to build political will. So how do you do that? So there are many things that you can do. Here are some examples. You can ask your bike shops to endorse a carbon fee and dividend with a border adjustment, have them make a public statement about it. But now I'm going to share something with you that all of us can very easily do. And this is, you can email or call your legislators, and I'm going to share a link with you that will make this really easy. How am I doing with time?
You're at 9 minutes, but we've got
Okay. So now you will see in the chat that there are 2 links, and hopefully someone has put that in the chat. So the single most important thing that you can do for the climate, and this takes less than 2 minutes. You'll see these 2 links in the chat. I want you to click on each of them, and this will take you to a link. You fill in your name and your address, and it will send a form email to your 2 senators and your representative, and it will tell them to support a carbon fee and dividend with a border adjustment. The second link will send a similar email to the president. Hopefully we can take 2 minutes to do this all together. And I need you to fill this out right now. Click on it, fill it out right now, your name and your address, because I need you to experience how easy and fast this is. So hopefully everyone's gotten started. When you contact your legislators, it is important to keep it fast and keep it frequent. No matter how often, what matters is how often you contact them. It does not actually help to compose your own personal email. This form email is enough. And I want you to put the links in your calendar. I want you to copy and paste both of these links into your calendar. I want you to make this a reoccurring weekly event for the next 3 to 4 months. And the reason we're doing this is that the Senate Finance Committee is considering putting a price on carbon, a dividend, and a border adjustment in the budget reconciliation bill. And this is going on right now. This sausage making process will take about 2 to 4 months, and we need to contact them every week during this process, because the fact that they're considering it doesn't mean that it's going to end up in the final bill. So I need you to do this and do it with me right now. This is the second link. You can use your phone to use the QR codes, but you need to do both of these actions, not just today, but every week over the next 3 to 4 months, because we have got to get this done. There is a window of opportunity right now that will close. If someone asks me about it in the chat or during the Q&A, I'll be happy to talk about that. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Very appreciative. And yes, I would urge all the folks who didn't have a chance to fill it out as Elaine spoke to do so during the Q&A session or immediately afterward. And now I'm going to introduce Paulo. Paulo, there you go. You're already there. Take it away.
Can you see my screen, Paul?
Yes.
Can you hear me? You can, right? Yeah. So I'm Paulo Nunes-Bueno. and I'm going to move my camera over here. And I am the transportation and land use policy lead for Front and Centered, and we are a coalition of organizations by, for, and led by people of color across Washington State, and we work on amplifying their voices in the area of climate justice. So I guess what I would like to talk to you about is related to Washington State, but also in terms of an overall sort of way of looking at this. The way that we like to talk about this is that we need to make a transition away from fossil fuels, but we also need to make a transition towards justice. And the sort of point that I want to underline here is that it's not because it's the moral thing to do, but also we really believe that it is the fastest way, probably the only way for us to take real climate action, is to take the voices of the people that are in the front line that are suffering right now from the climate crisis, that have been facing the lion's share of the burden of pollution, and be able to convert to a new way of organizing our economy and our society. So I don't have that many slides, but this is a picture of transportation injustice, where lots of us who are bicyclists, who are here, think about the question of personal choice, but ultimately what we're talking about are systemic structures and systemic investments that cause auto dependence, that make it so that those of us who can choose to ride a bike are a small privileged few. And the vast majority of people throughout our state, throughout our country, don't have that ability. So here are numbers that tell the story that we're dealing with in Washington State, but it's actually very similar across the country as well. In our state, the lion's share of greenhouse gases come from cars and trucks. And 1 in 8 women in Washington State have asthma, 1 in 14 men. This is one of the highest rates in the country, according to the Department of Health. Just 3 months ago, it's amazing to think that it was only 3 months ago, we experienced something that was completely out of the realm of our imagination in Seattle and in Portland that killed 1,200 people, right? The numbers are still coming in. We think it's around 1,200 people. And we know that there's a quarter of the people in Washington who are too young, too old, disabled, or just can't afford to drive. And yet, the overwhelming majority of our investments go to highways and auto-oriented projects. And the important thing here, and the framework that we use in thinking about this just transition, is that we stop the bad. We need to divest from the things that are going to lock in carbon consumption, that are going to lock in today's injustices for decades into the future. So today, as we speak, our legislators in Olympia are discussing a transportation package that by all indications is completely unmoored from these 5 numbers that I just showed you. The way that we make decisions that will invest billions of dollars, that will create more driving, more emissions, more asthma, more of a climate crisis, has completely zero relationship in Olympia, in our capital, to the impacts that they will have in the future. So for us, we think that it's important that we look at highway building just as the divest movement looks at pipelines. The dollars that we invest that will lock in more consumption of oil, that will create less mobility for people, are dollars that we're investing in going the wrong direction and we need to go and we need to stop that. So one of the reasons why this is happening is because our way of thinking about society, but about transportation, is shot through with this systemic racism and the systemic inequality, where some people are worth more than other people. And we need to address that head on. So the work that we're doing in terms of a just transition in transportation at Front Centered has three pieces: a mobility bill of rights, a mobility justice set of scorecards, and creating what we're calling a people's transportation package. And today I'm going to share with you the mobility bill of rights work that we've started. So we've been working with members who are organizations throughout Washington State, and we've been developing this idea of what are the fundamental things that whoever that person may be, whether they're young or they're old, they're poor or they're rich, they're Black or Latino or white or Asian, what are the fundamental things that are just rights, and they can't be traded away, and they can't be told, well, that's inconvenient, so we're not going to do it. And so as we talk to people, these are the 9 things that came up, and we asked our members to say, what are these things? Well, first, nobody should die. Nobody should be injured in our state roads, streets, and sidewalks. We've priced in an enormous amount of death in the way that we do transportation. And it's unacceptable that 30,000 people die every year. So doesn't sound like transportation, and yet it comes up, and it is that every household should be able to access fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes of where they live without a car. No one should be harmed by the pollution and noise from transportation. We should demand transportation that keeps us safer from the climate crisis in terms of resiliency today, but doesn't make it worse for future generations. Every trip that's a mile or less, you should be able to do that with dignity, whether you're walking or biking or using a wheelchair. And really importantly, no household should spend more than 45% of their income on housing, transportation, and energy. And this is really important. So, engineers use this idea of a design vehicle to create the parameters that guide whether a road is going to work or not. And we think that we need to flip that on its head and say that if we say we're going to create a transportation system where every 9-year-old girl who wants to bike or walk or use her wheelchair to get to school needs to be able to do that. If we take care of the most vulnerable users in our roadway, we are going to take care of everybody. And finally, or not finally, one more, that transit service needs to be frequent enough to get you to work and to get you back. So we need to be frequent and run late enough into the night so that people can come back as well. But most importantly, we need to create a transportation system where the owning and maintaining and insuring and being able to drive a car is not the price of admission to participation in society. And yet, the vast majority of our transportation dollars come from what is currently our price on carbon, the gas tax. So I'm actually quite skeptical that a carbon pricing scheme is going to help us unless we do 2 things. Stop investing in the carbon infrastructure right now. And as we speak to representatives in Olympia, it's really difficult to get them to just say no more highway expansions, even though we know that as you build highways, you induce more driving, you create more congestion, you lock in emissions for years to come, because we've created this monster with the gas tax that it can't be used for anything but highways. It creates this enormous incentive for DOTs across the country to actually have policies and designs in place that increase driving because it feeds the machine. Oh, look, here's my timer. I'm going to stop speaking now, Paul. So my request of everyone here is help us stop this investment in oil infrastructure, and let's create a transportation system that is fair and that is safe and that is just. And that is a great start.
Thank you very much, Paolo. I really appreciate your thoughts there. We look forward to your work in Olympia and hearing how we can all support that work to advance your mobility Bill of Rights. I'm going to take a few questions that were posted in the chat now. There was a question posed to Eric. Do you ask specifically, do you believe climate change is human caused? And I don't know, Eric, if you want to give your response to that question rather than me provide it.
Sure, we do. We say, assuming that climate change is happening, is it mostly human caused or mostly due to natural cycles? And we find that, I think it's 57% right now say it's mostly human caused, and 30% say it's mostly due to natural cycles, and everyone else says, I don't know. And so there's some interesting implications of that breakdown. And one, we see a pattern that when we ask about a lot of climate solutions, such as giving tax breaks to people who buy efficient cars, such as promoting renewables, we get 75–80% of people say, I like that idea. And so something's off on the numbers. More people are supporting the solutions than are saying that it's human caused. What's happening there is people support the solutions for different reasons. Some because of climate change, some because they like the idea of energy independence, and some for other reasons. So if you want to just not even think about whether or not it's human caused, and just go directly with certain audiences for here's the solutions and here's different reasons we should support it, and here's what it can look like to support this together. That's one tactic you can take based on these numbers. Another is if you're talking to that 30% that say it's human caused, our research shows that 30% that say it is a natural cycle, our research shows that people have no idea what scientists think on this. They think maybe half of scientists say it's human caused and the other half say it's a natural cycle. And they don't know that 97+% of scientists say it's human caused. And so when they hear that, especially from the right messenger, that moves people. And they say, oh, wow, all the scientists agree. And that makes people rethink it. But then also, you don't need those 30% of people necessarily if you can better organize the people who are alarmed, the people that understand that it is human caused more effectively, then we've got a winning strategy there as well.
Great, thank you very much, Eric. And we've got about 10 minutes left for this Q&A. And there was a couple questions posted for Paolo in the chat. Paolo, this is a question to you. Vision Zero is a huge program in the transportation space. Do you have recommendations on how we connect language around street safety and traffic fatalities to climate justice? So linking street safety and traffic fatalities to climate justice.
Yeah, well, I think that they're absolutely linked. That, you know, the cost of our auto dependency is so enormous, and it's not borne equally across society. that if we look at the rates at which people are killed in traffic crashes in Washington State, that indigenous people, native peoples are 8 to 12 times, I think, are the numbers more likely to be killed in crashes. And that, and rural communities have this disparity as well. And I think that where the linkage might be here is that when we have these enormous transportation packages that are largely focused on mega projects that quote unquote are designed to solve congestion, really the people that are most bereft of resources are rural communities, because those dollars are chasing congestion. So rural communities don't have the safety investments that they need, don't have the transit investments that they need, don't have sort of basic infrastructure because of the way that we're doing our mega projects. It's, you know, I think that if you talk to people across the country, you say the way that we do transportation investments in Washington State is among the worst, the most pork laden. And all of that poor policy making leads to the whole vast of bad outcomes, climate, and this unacceptable level of death on our roadways.
Great, thank you very much. We had another question. With the Washington State legislative session starting up in the winter, pardon me, what key issues should we expect to come up that we can get involved with, maybe related to your Mobility Bill of Rights?
Well, I you know, so here's what we're really concerned about is that the transportation package looks like it won't be up for discussion during the legislative session, but potentially doing this kind of shadow process that I never heard of called assembly days that precede the actual legislative session. So whereas we had 110 days to discuss the transportation package last year, and even that is a total sort of deficit of democracy, because the Senate unveiled their proposal at 9 o'clock one night and said, come back at 8 a.m. the next morning and we'll give you 30 seconds to opine on it. This year, what they're suggesting is compressing that into 5 days and having no public testimony. It's what we're hearing. So what I think that everybody who cares about this issue on this call should be telling their representative is no secret highways, no secret highway funding. Do not pass a transportation package in a shadow process.
Great, thank you very much, Paulo. This is a question, was not addressed to any one of the speakers in particular, but maybe Elaine could address it first. We've worked hard on getting a revenue neutral carbon tax in Washington State twice, unsuccessfully. If we can't do it in a blue state, how can we translate that nationally? Elaine, do you have any?
Yes. Oh, yes, I do have an answer for that. So the reason it didn't happen in Washington State is that various clubs wanted to, like the Sierra Club and other very environmentally friendly groups, could not get together and decide how much money to keep and how much money to return. And so we have got to join forces and stop fighting each other. The other thing I want you to know is that the reason that the Senate Finance Committee is considering putting a price on carbon, a dividend, and a border adjustment is because Citizens Climate Lobby members have reached out over the last month and a half and sent 70,000 contacts to their legislators. Before Citizens Climate Lobby members and friends started doing this, it was not on their agenda. The reason it's on the agenda now as a possibility is because of outreach, like the form email I sent to you. So do not think this will not happen. If you act like it's not going to happen and there's nothing you can do, it won't happen. I need you to feel the hope and your power of political outreach. And this form email literally takes 2 minutes. If you do it on your computer, the second and third and fourth and fifth time you do it, it takes 10 seconds. So just put it in your weekly calendar as a reoccurring weekly event and click on that form, click on that link every week for the next 3 to 4 months. And please get your friends and family to join me on my bi-weekly meetings that I offer. It's much more relaxed, it's more interactive, it's more conversational. I have more time, and it really gets people fired up. I've given the presentation for well over 600 people, and it works.
Thank you, Elaine. We've just got a few minutes left. Time for one quick question and answer, Paolo. What kind of response are you getting from housing developers who are building and locating housing away from services, transit, schools, et cetera? How can we influence location of housing?
I mean, I think that's a critical question, right? I mean, housing in general is in undersupply, and that's why we have the housing crisis that we have. So, you know, last year we worked with allies to work on to propose a Growth Management Act amendment that would include VMT reduction as part of the requirements, and that didn't pass. And I think that, you know, all of these things are so interconnected, and it's really, really hard to resist the appeal to build where land is cheap, particularly when the state is subsidizing sprawl by building more and more highways and creating more capacity for driving. So these things are linked. You know, I think we need, it would be excellent if we as a state could say, you know, we passed a cap and trade bill last year that we were very critical of, but we appreciate the sentiment that we need to do something about this. But at the same time, we're just plowing billions of dollars into more carbon infrastructure. So we need to make it easier for people to build more housing where there is transit, where there are biking and walking options. And at the same time, we need to stop subsidizing the creation of more climate changing gases.
Great, thank you, Paolo. We're just about at time. So I would really like to thank all of the speakers for being here. I would encourage all of the attendees to follow up with links to their individual organizations to learn more about how we can communicate, push for change at the federal and at the state level. And also a reminder that we're going to be sending out a Google feedback form. It'll be posted at the end of the session, and it will also be included in an email at the end of the day. We would love to get your feedback on how this session and the summit is going for you. And so I believe that's put us at about time. This has been great, and Cascade plans to do more and talk more about the issue of climate change and how bicyclists can engage in this epic challenge we face. So thanks to all of you. Tamar, as the summit organizer, is there anything else you'd like to add, or do we just time out here?
Just a quick reminder to folks that our afternoon session is investigating enforcement and active transportation. It'll be at 12:30 Pacific Standard Time, and we hope to see you all there. And thank you all. Have a great rest of your morning.
Thank you.
Bye.